So the first step in the research process is really you have to understand what you're researching, right? Identify that information that makes sense. Then once you identify the information you need, you have to define the problem. What is the problem you're researching? In this case, if we're getting a product into the marketplace, then you're researching how you get the product into the marketplace. So that's an important piece. Then you have to sort of choose how you analyze that issue. What is the data that you're looking at? Choose a system of analyzation that you're going to use. You look at that secondary data that's available. You have to look at the data that's available. Perhaps you have to look at primary data. How do you get primary data? Personal interviews, focus groups, things of that nature. You have to understand some of that. You have to look at the value of the research, right? There could be a monetary value of the stuff you have and don't have. And then you might want to design the research. What type of research do you need to put together and design? And then once you have that research, you have to come back and analyze it. Make sure you understand what's happening in that research that you're doing. That's important because research doesn't count if you don't understand it and analyze it. Then you'll have to take the findings and use that for your plan or for your strategy. Present the findings. So that's basically some top line fundamental steps on how you would research things. So in the international markets, well, what information do I need? What's important to me as an international marketer? The first thing you need to understand are the existing markets. So are the customers being served by one or more competitors, one or more companies? Let's look at what's happening in that target market to make sense. So if you bring a product into the US, you want to understand, well, are there competitive items in that marketplace? And what does that market look like? And how can I compete in that market? That's going to be key, right? And then you have to look at the potential markets. So if you understand what the markets are, what's the potential within that market? That's part of it. So, and then you have to ask yourself, well, why do I need to know this information? Why is that important? Because that helps build your strategy. You cannot go into a market not understanding what the opportunity is in that marketplace, right? So you have to sort of understand where the market's going to be. So is it in a region, a country, a region, a city? Uh, what's that geographic area that you're trying to target? So let's say you want to go into the U.S. You're bringing the product into the U.S. Should you start by saying, well, I want to bring this product into the U.S. and I want to target all the U.S.? That would be a hard thing to accomplish. So you should start geographically with a state or a city and then start in that area and then grow the business out from there, right? You don't want to take off, let's say you go from the US to Colombia. You don't want to tackle the whole country or, from here to Brazil. It would be impossible to penetrate the Brazilian market in the beginning. So you have to focus in on specific markets that make sense. That's going to be important. So if you have that data, you have to look at competitive records. What's that secondary data that's out there? I gave you a couple of resources. Research that. Understand what information, what data is available to you to make your plan and to build the business. That's going to be important. Then you have to look at the cost. How much does it cost me to get this information? There might be primary data out there that you could do inexpensively. Maybe you can go into the market and interview people or talk to some of the distributors or talk to some of the international companies that are out there. Perhaps there's secondary data which you can buy less expensively. So there has to be a cost to getting this information, and you have to understand what's the value of me in getting that information. So there is different ways of measuring information, different indicators that we have to understand. So how do we benchmark that information and what's important to know? So some things that are important to know is A, what's the market size? How many people can I reach with my product? Okay. The second thing to know is, what would they buy? Why would they buy me versus what's out there right now? What's the competitive item that's out there that could be a substitute of mine? And then, of course, you want to know what price. How much would they pay for this particular product? And how do they buy it? What's their purchasing patterns? In other countries, they purchase items differently than the way we purchase things here in the U.S. So you have to understand their purchasing patterns. Who buys the product? Is it the mom? Is it the dad? Is it the kids? And how often do they buy the product? So if you understand that, that helps you with that. Um, Listen, in markets, international markets, some data could be very hard to come by. So you might have to make some assumptions, and if you make those assumptions, they have to be solid enough to make a convincing argument that that's the market you want to go into. You have to be careful about assumptions because assumptions end up being incorrect a majority of the time. So you have to benchmark them against some type of reality. So it's important to understand that, what that means. Okay, and there's different type of markets. There's a latent market is sort of an undiscovered market. It lags behind. It hasn't yet been discovered. And there's an incipient market, which is it's going to exist when economic conditions get better. So you could be predictive in understanding the economy and develop a marketing plan for that marketplace. Then, if you go out and survey and you do these research, you have to have some benefits. You have to understand what that data collection means to you. A lot of the information you're probably going to get is secondary data. Very few companies get international data with primary methods. Only if you have a big budget do you normally do that, right? And then you have to realize that there's issues that could happen. So if you do primary data, you could do things like observations, consumer panels, focus groups, interviews, one-on-one interviews. All that is part of the process. You could even create a sampling program to test your idea. Create a sampling program and get the sample into people's hands to see if it makes sense, if they would like the product. You want to test that out. And then the last step, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, the last step is analyzing the data. Does it make sense? Will it work? Will people buy this product for that price? That's all important in understanding the data. So the key takeaway here is that you have to do research. You have to do research when you enter into an international market. You really can't enter into an international market just because you feel good about it. Because you went on vacation and you said, oh, this will be a great place to start a business. Sometimes that happens and sometimes you're successful. But in most cases, if you bring in a product into a country, you really have to understand the market conditions. You have to do the research. We talk about the 4 Ps all the time. So understand the 4 Ps as it pertains to your product in that marketplace. What products are there? How do they distribute products of your similar nature? How do they promote it? And what's the price? That's all important in understanding that international market. Okay. Any questions on the research and data? Most of your research, will be in secondary data, unless of course you have somebody that works in the market. Then of course you can have primary data, and that's going to